Hey guys, and welcome back to another Lost Bits video right here on DB Whale, the series where we explore the unused, scrapped, and unseen content in video games. And lol, how was my Tetra-bit gaming impression? Bad, it was bad, sorry you had to witness this. All jokes aside, Tetra-bit Gaming is a pretty cool channel and I recommend them. Link to their channel in the description. But I couldn't help but notice that they haven't made a Subnautica video yet in their Lost Bits series. I guess it is up to me to go and do it myself. This is what this video is. I will be taking a not so deep dive at the planned content for Subnautica that didn't make it past full release. But before we begin, this video will have story spoilers, so you are warned. Also, all the information in this video can be found in the cut content section of the Subnautica fan wiki. So now let's begin. So let's set some architect stuff out of the way. In Subnautica's architect buildings, you will come across alien terminals. Some are green and orange. But there were plans on also having a cyan terminal too. It would have most likely served a similar function as the other terminals, but I wonder why the developers didn't use it in the end since it was modeled and everything. Ion cubes are pretty cool, but what if we put multiple of them in one? Well, we would have found out with the ion cube matrix, but the developers decided to scrap it. It would have been used in the recipe for the Neptune escape rocket, but the developers replaced it with 2 ion power cells. It is a shame in my opinion. I think that needing to use an ion cube matrix would have made the ending of the game more special. But that is just what I think. Okay, this one might be familiar if you have seen my video on the secret developer menu and the pause menu in Subnautica. You saw that? The command, precursor keys, give you one of each precursor keys, even the ones that are not used in-game but still exist in Subnautica's data. These are the red and white precursor keys. The red key was probably meant to open some kind of special facility or some other precursor building. As far as I know, not much is known about it. On the other hand, the white key has more to it, as we know it was meant to be the key that opens the alien thermal plant before the developers decided they didn't need another type of key. I would have liked the idea of more types of precursor keys. It is just one of those the more the merrier situations. Alright, enough about the architect stuff. Let's move on to biomes, starting with the infamous Arctic biome. On screen right now is an old map in the game's data that shows Subnautica pretty early in development and features multiple places labeled as Arctic. The Arctic biome stayed present in the game for a surprisingly long time during development but was ultimately scrapped, leaving only its biome ID, some rock textures, data for icy patches on the seafloor that would make the prawn suit slide around, icicles, and this pretty cool cold water effect that will speed up your oxygen usage and damage you if not protected. This will later be reused in the making of Subnautica's sequel, Subnautica Below Zero. Okay, so this next biome is still in the game, known as the Grand Reef, but I wanted to mention the old version of the Grand Reef before it became what it is today because of how different it used to be. The data used for its terrain generation was wildly different. It featured these huge spikes which may have been the inspiration for the Crag Field, a biome added relatively late in Subnautica's development. It also had these mercury crystals, which I will get into more detail later. This next biome is called the Lily Pad Islands. This concept art made by Unknown Worlds art director, Corey Strader, depicts the biome to be similar to the Underwater Islands biome, but instead of floaters holding up plant masses, giant lily pad-like plants do. There are even some rumors that it is the Underwater Islands biome that replaced the Lily Pad Islands biome in early access. All that is left of it in Subnautica's data are some untextured models of some of the rocks that would be found in the biome, some of which are being held by what seem like the roots of the lily pad, and then there is the top of the lily pad. I wish this biome was in Subnautica, but at least I think they are reused and present in Subnautica's sequel, Subnautica Below Zero. Okay, so this last biome here is the Twisty Bridges biome. This was one of the earliest biomes to have started development for Subnautica. Unfortunately it was scrapped. It would have had a similar depth and fauna as the Safe Shallows, but with one key difference: its bridge-like structures. These so-called bridges have their untextured models in the game's data. And here is what it looked like very early in development. Many other things that were meant to spawn here were scrapped too, such as the Mohawk. More on that later. It is very sad, this biome had so much going for it. Let's begin looking at console commands that were in Subnautica during development but can no longer be accessed. I am starting off with a big one. The Entity Gallery. What this command does is spawn in a series white untextured boxes, each having one of every single entity in Subnautica. It has everything from the Reaper Leviathan to the most insignificant of coral. It even has this early version of the prawn suit. It also has some scrapped stuff that I will go into more detail later. Now next up are a few unused commands that I am going to briefly go over. First is the leak command. It was a command that would create a leak in your Cyclops, causing it to flood, and was scrapped because Cyclops flooding was scrapped. Cyclops flooding was scrapped because the developers decided to go a different direction on how the Cyclops would take damage. Next is the lock command. The command would lock blueprints that the player has unlocked. It was removed for unknown reasons. Next are the seal, shark, and sonic commands. These commands would set the player's speed to 5 times, 10 times, and 50 times respectively. These were removed for unknown reasons. Alright then, next are corals. Yes, there were some different types of coral that didn't make it to the full release of Subnautica. First up are small brain coral. We all know that brain coral is a thing in Subnautica for a very long time, but there was going to be a smaller variant. It seems to be just a smaller version of the regular brain coral. It would have likely produced less oxygen than the regular brain coral, or maybe even none. They were scrapped for unknown reasons. It is a shame because these corals are another one of those, the more the merrier, situations. Okay, there is one more thing about the brain coral that was scrapped. They used to die. Well, not that they are immortal now, but you used to be able to see them dead out in the open. They appear more white in color, just like how real-life earth coral look when they die. This happens to the brain coral when you slash at it with your survival knife too much. You kill it, and it also stops making oxygen. It was scrapped for unknown reasons. You have probably noticed the reef back in my background gameplay right now, you know, the one I am torturing with floaters. Yeah, they have something scrapped about them too. It is a coral that you would find on the reef back. It doesn't really have a name, but the data on it in the game calls it Reefback Coral 01. The only thing known about it is that it was intended to be found on the reef back. It was scrapped for unknown reasons. Alright. Let's step away from coral, okay? There is one deployable that was scrapped from the game. It is the current generator. It was black cube-shaped deployable that you would craft in a fabricator and took up 4 inventory slots. As its name suggests, it creates currents. These currents can push things both big and small, even your life pod. The only weird exceptions were sea moths and the Cyclops. It was very simple looking and obviously wasn't finished in any way. One cool thing you were able to do with it was surround your base in currents, and it would keep any unwanted hostile creatures from getting close, and if that wasn't already cool, it didn't need any power to function at all. It was scrapped due to lag as well as loading issues. Eggs. A nice warm breakfast. Speaking of eggs, eggs were gonna be very different in Subnautica. What we have in Subnautica as a release are a selected few creatures with eggs. You find a rabbit ray egg, you will hatch a rabbit ray. But eggs were gonna be a lot more luck-based. Instead of a selected few creatures getting eggs, there were gonna be 1 egg for every biome. They all look the same, besides some color differences. So, an example of how they work: if you get, let's say, a kelp forest egg, if you were to try to hatch it, there would be a chance of getting any creature that can spawn in that corresponding biome, such as a stalker, or a hoopfish. You just got to be lucky. I don't know why I like this or the egg situation we have already. Oh, and it isn't known why they were scrapped. Okay, next up for eggs is a scrapped reefback egg. Hey, you must be thinking, wait, I have seen that egg before. Well, kind of. Let me explain. This egg you see here is a spadefish egg, and this here is a reefback egg. They share the same model, but only one can be found in game, the spadefish egg. It is unknown why the reefback egg was scrapped. Egg number 3, the third egg. Eggs 3 on the list. Egg. Yup, egg 3 is the egg of the shuttlebug, the shuttlebug's egg. Yup. Okay, so, this egg cannot be found out in the wild, so you can't find it and hatch it. However, it is featured in the primary containment facility's egg laboratory, so that is cool. Why seeing it out in the wild is scrapped is unknown. Let's step away from the eggs and look at a few electronics. The first scrapped electronic on the list are the lithium-ion batteries. Before the ion battery, the lithium-ion battery was gonna be the upgraded version of the normal battery. The lithium-ion battery looks just like the normal battery, but it had twice the energy capacity and was crafted in the modification table using a battery and 1 lithium. It was scrapped to make room for the ion battery. The last electronic are the nanowires. The only thing really known about it is what the item icon looks like and is crafted by another scrapped entity, Mercury Ore. More on that later. It was probably scrapped because Mercury Ore was. Alright, let's go from artificial to natural. Time to talk about some scrapped environmental aspects in Subnautica. We have already talked about some of these when we were talking about the Arctic biome, you know, with the cold water, ice spikes, and ice patches, but there were plans for stuff like that to happen but in other biomes too. Let's start with some stuff that would have been found in the lava zone. First are the falling spires. Now, these are in the game, it is just that they do nothing when they were planned to do something. Besides being completely stationary, the falling spires would, well, fall. They would do this when there were too much vibrations. When they hit you, it would cause you to take damage. Next up are the lava bridges. These would be paths of thin rock that would create a path over large pits of lava for your prawn suit, but if there were too much vibrations, it would collapse, making your prawn fall in lava and take damage. These are nowhere to be seen in the world of Subnautica today. Lastly, are the lava sinkholes. These sinkholes would be giant chasms in the seafloor with a strange bubble-shaped object at the bottom. After some time, the bubble would burst, erupting, and causing damage, similarly to how the lava geysers work. If the lava sinkhole sounds familiar, that is because it is actually in the game and can be found. It is just that, it doesn't burst, or do anything. It is stationary, purely decorative. The reason why these 3 lava zone-related environmental phenomenons were either entirely scrapped or just partially is unknown. Okay, now these next few environmental phenomena don't have much known about them, so they probably didn't get far in development, so this will be brisk. First are currents. We have already talked about the current generator. Well, these two go hand in hand. Currents are the natural form of rushing water, as the current generator was the artificial way. These natural currents would be found in just about every biome and could push items, small fish, and maybe even the player. One odd thing about them that I feel is worth pointing out is that they have data on sleep patterns. Almost all creatures have data on whether they are diurnal, if they sleep at night, or nocturnal, if they sleep during the day. Some creatures are both and don't sleep, but the data would still be there. It is odd how the game identified these streams of rushing water as living creatures. Goes to show how little they were developed. Next are water streams. These work similarly to currents, except they were weaker and could make swimming through them much easier. Just like the currents, water streams could be found in just about every biome. Next up are whirlpools. These are like the currents, but more unique than the water streams. There is a good chance that whirlpools were meant to be a way of stopping the player from progressing the game too quickly. It would drag the player down, as whirlpools do, but that is just about it. They would have been very noticeable, so it isn't like you would get caught in one on accident. Huh, I wonder how much these would slow Salvner down in his speedruns if it were still in the game. Next up are rocks. No, not those rocks. More specifically, the game's data calls them physical rocks. They would have been able to be moved by vibrations, and that's all there is to them. And next is silt. Silt would lay on the seafloor. When something or someone touched it, it would be disturbed and obscure your vision. What is even worse is that they were gonna spawn in caves. Okay, so this last environmental phenomenon is probably the biggest / most well-known scrapped environmental phenomenon. Weather. There were plans of Subnautica to have moments of high winds, rain, lightning, and even snow in the previously mentioned scrapped Arctic biome, as well as tsunamis. Depending on the weather, your movement both on the surface and underwater would change. What I feel not many people realize, however, is that weather was pretty far into development. There are sounds of rain, wind, and thunder in the game's files, as well as textures. Take a listen. Alright, next up we got a piece of equipment. The thermometer. I was sad when I found out they scrapped it because I used to use it a lot. It simply tells you what temperature the water around you is at and was crafted with one computer chip. Oh, and I am not talking about vehicles, they still have thermometers, I mean the one that you can put on your HUD. When it is blue, it is cold, when it is green, it is humanly moderate, when it is yellow, it is warm, and when it is red, it is hot. It was scrapped because it was difficult to put into the last HUD update, more on that later. Alright, let's move on to what is, in my opinion, the most interesting type of scrapped content. Creatures. Starting out is the bloom plankton. These guys are unique as in terms of AI, they act like shoals of fish. What makes them cool was their ability to capture any light directed at them and holding onto it for a short amount of time. This could be utilized if you are in an open dark place such as the dunes biome at night. You point a flashlight at it, it will glow white. Throw a flare at it, it glows red. I just think they are neat. They were scrapped for unknown reasons. Okay, next scrapped creature is the bulletfish. It's easy to see that it didn't get far in development since it doesn't even have a model, so we don't know what it looks like. Based on what data is in the game, it might have acted similarly to the crashfish. It was planned to hide in holes on the seafloor, and when the player would come into range, it would dart out at you and swim back. It wouldn't deal any damage though, like you would expect. Instead, it would steal some oxygen, 10 seconds worth to be exact. This is a very unique creature and is a shame that it is scrapped. It was scrapped for unknown reasons. Oh right, I said I would come back to this guy, Ahim, the grab crab. I mentioned this guy when we were talking about the entity gallery. This guy was gonna be quite the intelligent species. The whole shtick about this creature is that it will go out to find items and maybe even certain small fish and bring it back to its home. The grab crab home was never modeled, so we don't know what that looks like. There even was some concept art for it, but as you can see, its model in the game looks drastically different. It even has a few sounds. There are 3 sounds that it would make if it were idle. A sound for when it picks something up. A sound for when it puts something down. And a sound that is titled, scare. This might be a sound that it makes if it were scared or maybe trying to scare something off. Maybe something or someone that got too close to the stuff it has collected. I do not know why it was scrapped. From a rather complex scrapped creature to a very simple one, we have the grower. Literally the only thing about this creature that is in Subnautica's in-game files is a script which would tell the creature's AI what to do. This script would have had the creature do 3 simple things: expand, shrink, and pulsate. And that is it. Very strange. Okay, now if my memory is correct, this next scrapped creature is the only creature to be featured in a trailer for Subnautica. The large bird. You may be familiar with the Sky Ray, you know, the only creature in Subnautica with the ability to fly, but that wasn't always gonna be the case. You can tell that the developers were confident about this creature being in the game because of its presence in Subnautica's first ever trailer. Pretty cool, right? Had a model and everything. Unfortunately, it was ultimately scrapped because the developers had later decided that having multiple flying creatures in a game like Subnautica, which primarily takes place underwater, would be rather unnecessary. Okay, so I want briefly go over some scrapped behaviors of creatures before we continue with the rest of the creatures. Firstly, the reefback was originally gonna be able to burrow in the seafloor. This would be how there is a reef on the reefback's back. It would have been disturbed if multiple large creatures migrated to the vicinity. You were also gonna be able to ride the reefback too. Secondly, the sea dragon Leviathan is gonna have an animation where it would try to crush the sea moth. And thirdly, the shuttle bugs were planned to be able to pair up with each other. They were also gonna be able to hide in creep vine if they were attacked. The next creature is what I think is the most developed scrapped creature in Subnautica. The rock puncher. Seriously, like, the developers could have put it in, and that is all that was needed. A model, animations, and AI. It was finished, but the developers scrapped it due to its planned terrain altering capabilities that is shared with the terraformer. More on that later. This ability lagged the heck out of the game, and because of that, it was scrapped. I think the developers reused this creature in Subnautica Below Zero with a few tweaks. Next up we have the sandworm. It was simply an ambush creature. It would have hidden holes that are similar in appearance to tree leeches. Once you get close, it would jump out at you, similarly to the crab snake. It was scrapped for unknown reasons. Next up is another simple creature. It is the slime. Not much is going for it. Its model, texture, and AI are all placeholders. It just stays there pulsating and shifting. There is one unique thing about it, however. In-game data indicates that this slime would act like a hazardous obstacle. It would appear only at certain times, which would have supposedly encouraged the player to explore certain areas at certain times. It was scrapped for unknown reasons. We are pretty much done with the creature section, but there is one small thing I want to point out, and that is that the lava lizard used to take the place of the stalker. Okay, so the next section are the scrapped floras. Now, I am going to briefly go through this section as there isn't much to these. First up is the hanging seaweed. This was gonna be hanging off of cliff edges in the safe shallows. Second is the mohawk, which were gonna be in the previously mentioned Twisty Bridges biome. Thirdly is the plant middle 11, that goes in an unknown biome. Fourthly is the spike trap. which is cool because it had these appendages that would grab and drag you into its mouth. Fifthly is the stitch grass, which would heal anything and anyone that went near it but would die if it was overused. And lastly is an unnamed plant. Nothing is known about it but what it looks like. Alright, next up are some scrapped game mechanics. Many of these are very interesting. First up is composting. Composting would have been used to obtain ethanol and a composted version of whatever you put into it. Two things I will go over later. There would have also been a way to obtain fertilizer and use it to convert ethanol into ethylene, also stuff that I will get into later. Next scrapped game mechanic is Cyclops flooding. Yep, the Cyclops used to be able to flood when it got too damaged. After enough water was present inside the Cyclops, it would start to sink to the seafloor. They ended up changing how the Cyclops got damaged to what it is today, but I would have loved having the flooding, and what we have today. Next one is interesting. Scrapped dialogue. First up is dialogue from your PDA when you first start a save. This was before the intro cutscene was added into the game.
In the late 22nd century, humanity is beginning to colonize space. Before colony ships arrive, habitation vessels are appointed terraforming missions. The Aurora was one such vessel. During its descent, the Aurora was struck by a mysterious energy pulse, resulting in catastrophic hull failure. A single life pod jettisoned prior to impact. You were in that life pod.
Next up we have some new/alter dialogue from your PDA warning you about your oxygen. When you are at 50%, it says,
Oxygen. 50%.
When you are at 25%, it says,
Oxygen. 25%.
And when you are at 10%, it says,
Warning, oxygen. 10%.
Next dialogue would have triggered when you would first open up your PDA.
Situational assessment. Time, T plus 3 hours since planet fall. Life pod hull, secure, communications, offline.
Next is some new/alter dialogue from the radio. When you repair it, it says,
Broadcasting. Emergency distress signal.
When you receive a new message, it says,
Captain. A new message has arrived.
And this is an older but still scrapped dialogue of when you repair it.
This is an automated bounce back from the Aurora mining vessel. Your distress signal has been received. An emergency relief team will be dispatched to your location. Estimated arrival time, 9 hours.
Next is an old broadcast form LifePod 17.
This is an automated distress signal from Aurora LifePod 17. Coordinates attached. Please send immediate emergency relief team.
Next are some old Sunbeam broadcasts. Message 1 says,
This is Avery Quinn of Trading Ship Sunbeam. Aurora, do you read? Over? Still nothing. These Alterra ships. They've run out of engine grease. They send an SOS. You offer to help, they don't pick up. Aurora, I'm out on the far side of the system. It's going to take more than a week to reach your position. Do you still need our assistance? Over. I'll try them again tomorrow. See what the long-range scan picks up in the meantime? Damn charter's going to have us wasting our profit margin running errands for Alterra.
Message 2 says,
Aurora, this is Sunbeam again. We just picked up a massive debris field at your location. I didn't know how bad. How many of... I didn't know. We're now en route to your location. We're gonna bring you home. Sunbeam out. What else can I say? We're a 6-seater, and we aren't even slightly equipped to handle this? Our pilot last attempted a planet landing in the Academy simulator? Oh, it's a bad situation, but so are all the alternatives.
Message 3 says,
Sunbeam broadcasting to all survivors of the Aurora. We've covered more than half the distance, so hold on in there. We're scanning the planet for dry land as we speak. You couldn't have picked a less convenient parking spot. But we'll be in touch as soon as we have a landing site for you. Sunbeam out.
And message 4 says,
Aurora, it's Sunbeam. We've made orbit, and scans have found a landing site on the planet that's only rated hazardous. It's our best shot. We've sent you the coordinates. We'll be there in 2 days' time. Cross your fingers the weather holds. And don't leave us waiting. Sunbeam out.
At the end of the Sunbeam event, if you were at the quarantine enforcement platform, slightly altered dialogue would have said,
Attention. Patching in a local broadcast from the Sunbeam.
I don't believe it. There's someone down there. Aurora, survivor. We have your PDA signature. I don't know how you walked away from that wreck, let alone survived since then. But we'll be happy to bring you on board and hightail back to Federation space. Stand back. We're approaching the landing site now. Breaking atmosphere in 5, 4, 3... What is that? No, the red spike. From the planet?
If you would have disabled the quarantine enforcement platform before then, slightly altered dialogue would have said,
Aurora survivors, this is Trading Ship Sunbeam. We've tracked your distress signal, but your ship's left a giant debris field up in orbit. We can't attempt a landing. You're gonna have to head home. We'll send our data to Alterra as soon as we can. Hold on in there. Sunbeam out.
Next are some Cyclops dialogue. First up is what it would have said when you entered the Cyclops.
Welcome aboard, Captain.
This is what it would have said if you exceeded the safe depth limit, which wouldn't damage your Cyclops but will cause it to take damage from collisions.
Caution. Passing safe depth.
This is what it would say if you were to exceed the crush depth.
Warning. Maximum depth reached. Hull damage imminent.
This is what it would say if the Cyclops hull failed.
Warning. Hull integrity compromised.
This is what it would say if a breach opened in the Cyclops.
Emergency. Hull breach detected.
This is what it would say if the breach was sealed, which referenced how the Cyclops used to be able to flood.
Hull integrity restored. Draining systems initiated.
Next are two Seamoth dialogues, one saying this when there would have been a hull breach,
Emergency. Hull breach detected.
and one when you repaired it.
Hull integrity restored. Draining systems initiated.
This hints towards the idea that the Seamoth was originally planned to be able to flood too. And lastly we have some sea-based dialogues. First of which is what would have been said if the hull integrity increased.
Hull integrity increased.
What it would have said when the hull integrity lowers.
Caution. Hull integrity decreased.
What it would have said when a breach is about to open up.
Warning. Hull breach imminent.
What it would have said when a breach did open.
Emergency. Hull breach detected.
What it would have said when your base's power reaches below 30%.
Caution. Base power at 30%.
And lastly, what your sea base would have said if the power reached below 10%.
Caution. Base power at 10%.
I remember when a lot of these dialogues were in the game. Okay. Now that we are done with dialogue, we can get to the next game mechanic. Durability. This game mechanic affected nothing but all the survival knife variants. The survival knife, thermo blade, and the now scrapped hardened blade. After a certain number of strikes with either these three would have caused it to break. With the survival knife, you has 100 slashes. With the thermo blade, you had 34 slashes. And with the hardened blade, you had a 200 slashes. The hardened blade was scrapped because this game mechanic was scrapped, and the durability game mechanic was scrapped, probably because it would have ruined the flow of the game. Next game mechanic is overeating. In Subnautica, as a full release, overeating will give you extra hunger as well as some bonus health, but it wasn't always a good thing to do. You would actually lose health. The only food that wasn't affected by this were gel sacks, oddly enough. And guess what? More dialogue is linked to it. Ha, you thought we were done with dialogue, did you? Well, don't worry, it is only 2 things that your PDA would have said to you. If you ate only slightly too much, your PDA would have said,
Warning, without variety in your diet your fluid and nutrient levels will decrease.
and if you overate a lot, your PDA would have said,
Warning. Blood loss detected.
I am kind of glad this was removed. This next game mechanic is one that really stood out for me. This is a voxel terrain generating system of some sorts. Subnautica's map will always be the same, no matter how many times you load up a new save. Well, there is data in-game that suggests there were plans on the world to be different each time you start a save file. It would have done this with the use of seeds. The world would have been made up of preset tiles, which would randomize in a grid-like fashion of sorts, and mesh together. The placement of these tiles would have been randomized to make the world different, each save. There is data for tiles of the safe shallow biome, the kelp forest biome, the mushroom forest biome, and even tiles of the bulb and lava zones. I understand why some people would want this, but I prefer having the map the same every time like it is today. I feel that it being like that gives Subnautica more of an identity. Alright, now that we are through the game mechanics, we can get to the scrapped materials. I will be brief with this since there are so many and most of them don't have much to them. First is, amino acids. It was going to be used to craft graphene, another scrapped material. Next is, battery acid. It might have been used to craft batteries. Next is, calcium. It would have been crafted from coral tube samples and would have been used to craft bleach. Next is, carbon. This one went through a few changes before being cut. At first, it would have been obtained through refining plant matter or through calcite, a scrapped outcrop. Later, it would have been obtained through slashing at stalkers with the survival knife, and just before it was completely scrapped, it was going to be crafted from 3 acid mushrooms and would have been used to craft batteries. Next is, emery. This may have been used to craft the survival knife and maybe the drill, another scrapped tool. Next is, ethanol. This would have been made in the crafting of ethylene, and would have been obtained as a byproduct of composting plant matter. Next is, ethylene. Not much is known about it other than that it ripens fruit, blooms flowers, and sheds leaves, whatever that means. Next is, flint. It would have been found in the safe shallows, kelp forest, and grassy plateaus biomes, and would have been used to make flares. Next is, graphene. Not much is known about it other than that it is crafted using carbon. Next is, hydrogen. It would have been used to craft flares. Getting hydrogen would require an electrolyzer, a scrapped item, or by placing calcium in water. Next is, lodestone. Nothing but its name is in game. Next is, magnesium. It was crafted from 3 salt deposits and was used to make flares and a repair tool. Next is, membrane. It would have been obtained from membrane trees and was used to make water, but that role was replaced by the bladderfish. Next is, mercury crystals. It would have been used to make thermometers. Next is, mercury ore. It would have been used to make the Cyclops fire suppression system. Next is, metal. It was replaced by titanium. Next is, neoprene. It was crafted from zinc, another scrapped material, and would have been used to craft fins, knives, repair tools, and flares. Data on dive tools, hammers, and sea jets are linked to this material. Next is, opal gem. The only reason we know this exists is because of language files. Next is, rutile. It would have been used to craft titanium. Next is, sand. You could dig the seafloor and collect sand. It would have been used to make glass and was removed along with terraforming. Next is, uranium. It was scrapped very late, not long before full release. It was crafted from 3 uraninite crystals and was used in the making of reactor rods. Lastly is zinc. It was used in the making of batteries and neoprene. Yeah. I would have loved to see these materials fleshed out and still in the game. Ahem, okay, next up are 3 upgrade modules for the Cyclops that were scrapped. One thing to note is that all of these were scrapped at the same time, when you weren't able to stack upgrade modules anymore. First up is the Cyclops Pressure Compensator. It was a depth module that would have added 900 meters for both the safe diving limit and the crush depth limit. Secondly is the Shell Hull Reinforcement Module. It was a depth module that would have added 1,600 meters to both the safe diving limit and the crush depth limit. Lastly, but also the most uniquely, is the Kilonian Hull Reinforcement Module. What made it so unique is that it requires the transfuser, a scrapped tool that I will get to later, because reef-back DNA is needed in this module's crafting recipe. It was a depth module that would have added, get this, 2,800 meters, for both the safe diving limit and the crush depth limit. I can see why these were scrapped, but I would have been really interested in that last one. Next scrapped entities are the ore deposits and outcrops. Let's start with the ore deposits. The first one is the ruby deposit. Well, it was actually called the aluminum oxide deposit, but sometime after this was already scrapped. Aluminum oxide was renamed to rubies, which are what we have today. Next is the diamond deposit. It drops diamonds. Next are the mercury deposits. It was found near mercury ore. Lastly, are the sulfur deposits, which would drop crystalline sulfur. It would have likely spawned under the brine in the Lost River. Now the outcrops. First is the basalt outcrop. It looked similar to the shale outcrop and would have dropped gold, diamond, and uraninite crystals. Next is calcite. It acted as both an outcrop and a material. You could break it, in turn would give you calcium, or you can harvest it. Data on cements, fertilizers, metals, glass, rubber, and even paint are all linked to calcite. Next up is dolomite. It would have taken more than just a few hits to break like the other outcrops and would have dropped copper. Data of gas and oil is linked to it and it doesn't have a model. Next is the obsidian outcrop. It only has this temporary model and would have spawned in the lava zones, giving you diamonds. Lastly are rocks. Yeah, that is what they are called. They would have spawned in the mushroom forest and would have yielded magnesium and rarely copper. I would have loved to see all of these fleshed out and in the game still. Alright, now that we are done with it we can start looking at some PDA stuff. First up we have plans on your PDA, on having a mini-map. Much like how there are tabs on your PDA, that tells you your inventory, or your blueprints, there was also going to be one that displays a map of sorts. How it would work is that, when you start a save file, the map would be blank, but as you travel and explore, the map would be filled in as you go. Unfortunately, this feature was scrapped incredibly early in development. It was cut even before the first playable build of Subnautica. Next up was the old scanning system. So, how it worked was that if you were to stare at something for a short amount of time, whether that would be an item, or maybe even a creature, a small and basic description of the entity would appear on your HUD. If they were scanned using a spectroscope scanner, you would have unlocked a longer, more detailed description. This was most likely what the databank entries we have today used to be. The last thing with the PDA are signals. Signals were items that you would find in Subnautica that would have acted like pings in the ping management section of your PDA, which is what is currently in the game. Holding a signal or putting it in the chip slot, in your inventory, would make a ping appear where it tells you to go. The signal, as an item appeared to be unfinished and is just a simple X shape. This was until it was changed to look like waves of what I assume are of the sound type, before it was scrapped for good. Some pings may tell you where cave entrances are, some tell you where certain natural formations are, and some even tell you where some crashed life pods are. These were tedious to manage and the ping management system we have today is so much better. Next up we have two placeable items. First is the infinite poster. Not much is known about it and its origins are unknown. Secondly is a green cap. We are able to get a gray cap and a blue cap in the game, but the green cap goes unused for unknown reasons. Next up are some base pieces. First up is the accumulator. Its one and only purpose was to store power. And because of that, it was its downfall. It was probably scrapped because bases stored power anyways. Next up is the old bioreactor. Lol, how this thing looks reminds me of the HETE from Star Wars. The old bioreactor was built outside your base, like a solar panel, and was limited to only being able to use fungal samples and creep van samples only. Next up is the botanical analysis machine. It was intended to be used to study flora but was scrapped when the scanner was added. Next is the centrifuge. It was used to turn DNA samples from the transfuser, again, more on that later, and create serums. Next up is the composter. It would have been used to convert plant matter into ethanol, possibly over time. It doesn't have a model and it seems to have been scrapped very early. Next is the fragment analyzer. Before the scanner was added to the game, you would collect fragments and put them in the fragment analyzer, and over time, you would learn how to make stuff. It would have also been used to identify the previously mentioned biomegs. Next up is the old nuclear reactor. It used raw uraninite crystals instead of reactor rods like today. Next up is the old observatory. It looked like a basic glass box. Oddly enough, it was made, not by through the habitat builder, but through the mobile vehicle bay. Next is the power generator. It would use power cells to power your base but was essentially replaced by the nuclear reactor. Next is the specimen analyzer. Like how the botanical analysis machine was for flora, the specimen analyzer was for small fish and eggs. It was scrapped with the introduction of the alien containment and scanner. Lastly is the old thermal plant. The only difference was its model and that it only held a maximum power of 50. Okay, the next section are some story-related changes. First up is the Aurora. This is what the finished look of the Aurora today. But at the starship that you were once in went through many design changes throughout development. In the beginning, circa March 25, 2014, it adopted a much sleeker look, featuring a more bottom-up position. It had a smaller bridge at the top, as well as front-facing windows. The biggest difference, however, is that at the time, the Aurora was 2D. Later, on August 18, 2014, the Aurora changed again. The developers gave the Dane of the Aurora a complete overhaul. It still had a bridge, although much bigger, as well as it kept that same, bottoms-up, position, and it was still 2D. This the very same Aurora featured in Subnautica's very first trailer. Later, just before Subnautica's early access launch, they had turned their new 2D Aurora into a full-blown 3D model, with the biggest change to it being that it was no longer in that bottom-up position. April 4, 2015, the Aurora finally got an interior, making it explorable. Not much changed with the Aurora after that, other than the removal of the side entrance. The next story-related thing to be scrapped were some scrapped endings. Now instead of explaining them, I want you to see them for yourself because if you are like me, this kind of thing is really interesting. Links to these endings are in the description. Next story-related scrapped content. Okay, remember the dialogue section of this video? I showed off dialogue that used to play at the beginning of the game, before the intro cutscene was added. Well, there was a piece of audio that used to play at the beginning of the game, even before that, and I want to show it here. It isn't much but still pretty cool. Next up for story-related stuff, we got the old texture for the Kiraur bacterium that has been infecting every creature in the game. It looks much more warm, having a yellow coloration with red pigments, instead of the green that is what it is now. I guess it makes sense that it was changed since green is the color more linked to disease. Okay everyone, we are done with the story-related scrapped content and we are now on our last section. Scrap tools. First up we have the drill. No, not that one. Yeah, that one. Actually bring it back, yeah, they both serve the same purposes and that's about it. Next is the previously mentioned electrolyzer. It was used to turn water into oxygen and hydrogen. It could have been used to slow down the flooding of the Cyclops. Next is the Power Glide. It was an upgraded version of the current Sea Glide. It looks and acts just like a Sea Glide except it goes 3 times as fast. Next is the previously mentioned Terraformer. It was used to alter the terrain around you, whether that is digging a hole, or making a hill. It is a shame this was scrapped. Lastly is the previously mentioned Transfuser. This would allow you to extract the DNA from other creatures and then inject it into yourself to give you different properties corresponding to the creature of said DNA. It was scrapped because story changes would have made it useless. Well, that is it everyone. Of course, I have no doubt that there is more scrapped content in Subnautica, but this video is already a week late and this is all of the ones that I know of. Hey, if you know of any more scrapped content from Subnautica's development that I haven't gone over in this video, comment it down below, and if you want to help out the Subnautica community, add what you know in the Subnautica fan wiki. Again, link in the description. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one.